The
I
evening
love these
rain
moments
fell
with
steadily
you.
on the
Me
quiet streets
too.
of
You're
Portland,
so special to
creating
me.
gentle rivers along the sidewalks. Margaret Chen had been driving home from another exhausting shift at her medical supply company when she noticed a small figure huddled near the entrance of a closed pharmacy. Even through the rain-streaked windshield, Margaret could see it was a child in a wheelchair, completely alone. Margaret was 58 years old, with silver-streaked blonde hair usually pulled back in a practical ponytail. Tonight, strands had escaped and clung to her face from the dampness. She wore her usual blue work jacket with her company's emblem on the pocket. The same jacket she'd worn for nearly 20 years as she'd built her business from nothing into something substantial. The jacket was soaked now, but that didn't matter. The child was perhaps 8 or 9 years old, with blonde hair visible beneath a white knitted winter hat with a pom-pom on top. She wore a bright red puffy jacket that was now thoroughly wet, and her small hands gripped the armrests of her wheelchair as if holding on for dear life. Tears streamed down her young face, mixing with the rain. Margaret pulled her van to the curb without a second thought. She grabbed an umbrella from the passenger seat and hurried over, her blue medical gloves still on from her last delivery. As she approached, she could hear the child's quiet sobs. "Sweetheart," Margaret said softly, kneeling down beside the wheelchair so she could look directly into the little girl's eyes. "Are you hurt? Where are your parents?" The child looked up at her with wide, frightened eyes. Up close, Margaret could see she had delicate features and a spray of freckles across her nose. The girl's lips trembled as she tried to speak. My dad," she managed to say between sobs. "He's supposed to pick me up, but he's not here. I waited at school, and Mrs. Patterson brought me here because the school was closing. She had an emergency. She said she'd call my dad, but nobody came." Margaret's heart clenched. She held the umbrella over both of them, though they were already drenched. "What's your name, honey?" "Emma," the girl whispered. "Emma Harrison." "I'm Margaret," she said warmly. "Emma, I know you're scared right now, and that's perfectly normal. But you're not alone anymore. Do you know your dad's phone number?" Emma nodded and recited the number through her tears. Margaret pulled out her phone with her free hand and dialed. The phone rang and rang before going to voicemail. She tried again. Same result. "Okay," Margaret said, keeping her voice steady and calm. "Here's what we're going to do. You're soaking wet and it's getting cold. I'm going to take you somewhere warm and safe, and we're going to keep trying to reach your dad. Does that sound all right?" Emma hesitated, and Margaret understood. The child had surely been taught not to go with strangers. "I know your parents taught you to be careful," Margaret said gently. "That's very smart. But right now, staying out here in the cold rain isn't safe either. I promise you I'm going to help you find your dad. I have a daughter not much older than you. Well, she's grown now, but I remember when she was your age. I would want someone to help her if she was scared and alone." Something in Margaret's voice must have reassured Emma, because the little girl nodded slowly. Margaret's van was equipped with a lift, one of the modifications she'd insisted on when she bought it years ago, knowing that many of her clients needed wheelchair-accessible transportation for their medical equipment. She carefully helped Emma inside, making sure the wheelchair was properly secured. Then she cranked up the heat and handed Emma a clean blanket she kept in the back. "There's a diner just a few blocks from here," Margaret said as she started driving. "It's warm, it's bright, and they make the best hot chocolate in the city. We'll get you dried off and warmed up while we figure out how to find your dad." As they drove, Emma gradually stopped crying. Though her small body still shook occasionally, Margaret kept up a gentle stream of conversation, pointing out familiar landmarks, telling Emma about her own daughter, Rachel, who was now 32 and worked as a teacher in Seattle. Rachel was always getting herself into little adventures when she was young, Margaret said with a soft laugh. "One time, she decided to run away because I said she couldn't have ice cream before dinner. She made it all the way to the end of our driveway, about 50 feet, before she came back. She'd forgotten her favorite stuffed elephant." Emma managed a tiny smile at that. The diner, Joe's Place, was a cozy establishment that had been serving the neighborhood for 40 years. The owner, Joe Martinelli, was behind the counter as always, his weathered face breaking into a smile when he saw Margaret come in until he noticed the wet, frightened child. "Margaret," he said, coming around the counter immediately. "What's happened here?" "This is Emma," Margaret said. "We're having a little adventure while we track down her father. Could we get 2 hot chocolates and maybe some of your famous grilled cheese sandwiches?" "Coming right up," Joe said, understanding immediately. He'd raised 4 kids of his own and knew that look of worry on a child's face. Margaret helped Emma out of her wet jacket and draped it over a chair near the heater. The white knitted hat came off too, revealing damp blonde hair that Margaret gently patted with napkins. They settled into a booth near the window where Emma could see outside, and Margaret sat across from her. "Can you tell me a bit about your dad?" Margaret asked as they waited for their food. "What's his name?" "His name is David," Emma said quietly. "David Harrison. He works really hard. Sometimes he has to work late, but he always picks me up from school. Always. Something must be wrong." Margaret heard the fear creeping back into the child's voice. "I'm sure there's an explanation," she said reassuringly. "Sometimes grown-ups get caught up in things they can't control. Traffic jams, phone batteries dying, unexpected meetings that run long. It doesn't mean they don't care." "He cares a lot," Emma said with sudden fierceness. "After my mom died 2 years ago, he does everything. He helps me get dressed, he makes my lunch. He braids my hair even though he's not very good at it yet. He reads to me every night. He never misses a day." Margaret felt a lump forming in her throat. A widower, raising a child with disabilities, working hard to keep everything together. She could only imagine the weight this David Harrison carried. "He sounds like a wonderful father," Margaret said softly. The hot chocolate arrived, rich and steaming, topped with whipped cream. Emma wrapped her small hands around the mug, and Margaret could see the warmth seeping back into the child's fingers. Joe brought the grilled cheese sandwiches, too, cut into triangles just the way kids like them. "Emma," Margaret said after they'd both taken a few bites, "does your dad work somewhere nearby? Maybe we could try calling his office." Emma's face brightened a little. "He has an office downtown. It's a big building. The Harrison Building. He owns a company that makes, I think, computers? Technology stuff?" Margaret paused, her sandwich halfway to her mouth. "The Harrison Building? Is your father David Harrison of Harrison Technologies?" Emma nodded, not understanding why Margaret suddenly looked stunned. Margaret knew of Harrison Technologies. Everyone in Portland did. It was one of the largest tech companies in the Pacific Northwest, worth billions. David Harrison's face had been on the cover of business magazines. He was known for his innovation, his philanthropy, and apparently, according to rumors, his reclusiveness since his wife's death. But titles and money meant nothing right now. What mattered was that this little girl needed her father. Margaret pulled up Harrison Technologies' main number online and called. A pleasant automated voice greeted her, offering a menu of options. She pressed 0 for the operator. "Harrison Technologies, how may I direct your call?" A woman's voice answered. "This is Margaret Chen. I have David Harrison's daughter Emma with me. There was a mix-up with pickup from school and she's been trying to reach him. It's important that I speak with him immediately." There was a pause. "I'm sorry, ma'am, but Mr. Harrison is in a board meeting and specifically requested not to be disturbed. If you could leave a message." "His daughter is sitting in the diner, scared and wet from waiting in the rain," Margaret said firmly. "I don't care if he's meeting with the president. Get him on the phone, now." Her tone left no room for argument. Margaret had spent decades running her own business, dealing with insurance companies, hospital administrators, and bureaucrats. She knew how to command respect when it mattered. "Please hold," the operator said quickly. Margaret winked at Emma, who was watching with wide eyes. "Sometimes grown-ups need a little push," she said. Less than a minute later, a man's voice came on the line, breathless and panicked. "This is David Harrison." "Who is this? Is Emma okay? Where is she?" "Mr. Harrison? My name is Margaret Chen. Emma is safe and sitting right here, with me at Joe's Diner on Morrison Street. She's fine, just a little shaken up. There was some confusion with her pickup from school." "Oh, God," the voice said, and Margaret could hear genuine anguish in it. "I was in a meeting that ran late and my phone was on silent. I completely lost track of time. Emma's school. The teacher was supposed to wait with her." "I'm so sorry." "I'm leaving right now. Please, can I talk to her?" Margaret handed the phone to Emma, whose face transformed the moment she heard her father's voice. "Daddy?" she said, and fresh tears started. But these were different tears. I was so scared. I thought something happened to you. Margaret couldn't hear the other side of the conversation, but she watched Emma's expression shift from fear to relief to something like joy. It's okay, Daddy, Emma was saying. This nice lady Margaret found me. She brought me to a diner and got me hot chocolate, with whipped cream and a grilled cheese. A pause. No, I'm not hurt. Just wet. Another pause and then a small giggle. Okay, I'll wait. I love you too. Emma handed the phone back to Margaret. Ms. Chen, David Harrison said, and his voice was thick with emotion. I don't know how to thank you. I'll be there in 15 minutes less. Please stay with her. Of course, Margaret said. We're not going anywhere. Drive safely. While they waited, Margaret ordered Emma a piece of apple pie, Joe's specialty, and they talked about school, about Emma's favorite subjects. She loved art and science. About her friends. Emma opened up more as she relaxed, telling Margaret about her wheelchair, which she decorated with stickers of stars and planets. I want to be an astronomer when I grow up, Emma said, her eyes brightening. Or maybe an astronaut. They're doing research on making space more accessible for people with disabilities. Isn't that cool? That's very cool, Margaret agreed. You know what I think? I think you can do absolutely anything you set your mind to. That's what my dad says, Emma replied. And what my mom used to say. They're right, Margaret told her. 14 minutes later, Margaret checked her watch. A black SUV pulled up outside the diner so quickly it nearly hit the curb. A man burst out, not even bothering to close the door properly, and rushed inside. David Harrison was tall, probably in his early 40s, with dark hair that looked like he'd been running his hands through it repeatedly. He wore an expensive suit, but the tie was loosened and the jacket was unbuttoned. His eyes scanned the diner frantically until they landed on Emma. Emma, he breathed, and he was across the room in seconds, dropping to his knees beside the booth. He wrapped his arms around his daughter, careful not to jostle her wheelchair, and Emma hugged him back just as tightly. I'm so sorry, sweetheart, he was murmuring. I'm so sorry. Daddy messed up. I should have had my phone on. I should have remembered. I'm sorry. It's okay, Emma kept saying. It's okay, Daddy, I'm okay. Margaret found herself blinking back tears as she watched them. Joe, behind the counter, was wiping his eyes with his apron. After a long moment, David pulled back and really looked at his daughter, checking her over as if to reassure himself she was truly all right. Then he turned to Margaret, who had been sitting quietly, giving them their moment. Ms. Chen, he said, and his voice cracked slightly. He seemed to be struggling for words. I don't. Thank you doesn't seem like enough. You don't need to thank me, Margaret said gently. Any decent person would have done the same. But you did it, David insisted. He stood up, and Margaret could see he was trying to compose himself. Please, there must be something I can do. Let me cover her dinner. It's already taken care of, Margaret said. Really, Mr. Harrison, I'm just glad Emma is safe and you're here now. David looked at her for a long moment, and Margaret saw something in his eyes, a depth of gratitude that went beyond words, mixed with something else, perhaps recognition of a kindred spirit, someone else who understood what it meant to put a child's needs above everything else. At least let me know who you are, he said. Your full name, your business, something. Margaret Chen, she said. I run Chen Medical Supply. We provide medical equipment and supplies to hospitals, clinics, and individuals who need home care items. David's expression shifted to one of surprise, then respect. Chen Medical Supply, I've heard of your company. You have an excellent reputation for reliability and for actually caring about your clients rather than just treating them as transactions. Margaret felt a warm flush of pride. That's what we strive for. Would you... David hesitated, then seemed to make a decision. Would you be willing to have coffee with me sometime? I'd like to properly thank you, and honestly, I'd like to know more about the person who was there for my daughter when I wasn't. Margaret saw something vulnerable in his eyes, something that had nothing to do with business or money. This was a father who'd been frightened out of his mind, and a man who looked very alone, despite his success. I'd like that, she said simply. They exchanged phone numbers, and David promised to call her the next week. Then he settled Emma's bill despite Margaret's protests. Joe winked at her when she tried to argue and carefully helped Emma into her jacket. "Thank you, Margaret," Emma said, reaching out to squeeze Margaret's hand. "For finding me. For the hot chocolate. For everything." "You're very welcome, sweetheart," Margaret said, squeezing back. "You're a brave, smart girl, and I'm glad I met you." As Margaret watched them leave, David pushing Emma's wheelchair carefully, both of them huddled under his jacket. Against the still-falling rain, she felt something shift in her chest. She'd been so focused on her business for so long, on being strong and independent, that she'd forgotten what it felt like to make this kind of connection. Joe came over and sat down across from her. "That was a good thing you did tonight, Margaret. Anyone would have done it," she repeated. "But you did," Joe said, echoing David's earlier words. "That's what matters." A week later, David called and asked if she'd like to meet for coffee on Saturday. Margaret said yes. They met at a quiet cafe, and what was supposed to be an hour turned into 3 hours of conversation. They talked about their children, about Loss, David's wife, Margaret's late husband who'd passed 5 years ago, about the challenges of running businesses while trying to maintain some semblance of work-life balance. "I failed Emma that day," David admitted, stirring his coffee. "I got so caught up in a board meeting, in trying to close a deal that would secure jobs for hundreds of employees, that I forgot the most important thing. My phone was on silent and I just lost track of time. The school called my emergency backup number, but that person was out of town. They called a neighbor who sometimes helps Mrs. Patterson, and she had a family emergency of her own. It was a perfect storm of circumstances, but that doesn't excuse it." "You're human," Margaret said. "Humans make mistakes. What matters is that Emma knows she's loved. And trust me, after spending time with her, I can tell you that child has no doubt about that." David smiled, but it was tinged with sadness. "After my wife died, I promised myself I'd be enough for Emma. Both parent and father, and everything she needed. But some days I wonder if I'm doing it right." Margaret reached across the table and briefly touched his hand. "David, I raised a daughter largely on my own after my husband's death. And you know what I learned? Kids don't need perfect parents. They need present parents. Parents who love them, who show up, who try their best. You're doing that. One missed pickup doesn't erase years of being there every other day." They began meeting regularly after that, sometimes for coffee, sometimes for dinner. David brought Emma along often, and Margaret found herself growing deeply fond of the bright, cheerful girl. Emma had a way of asking profound questions. "Do you think stars know we're looking at them? If we're all made of stardust, does that mean we're related to the whole universe?" That made Margaret think and laugh in equal measure. 6 months after that rainy evening, David asked Margaret to dinner, just the two of them, without Emma for the first time. They went to a restaurant overlooking the river, watching the sun set over the water. "Margaret," David said as they lingered over dessert, "I need to tell you something. When I met you that night, I was drowning. Oh, I looked successful from the outside. The company was doing well. I was on magazine covers. People called me a business success story. But inside, I was barely keeping my head above water. I was lonely. I was exhausted. I felt like I was failing Emma every day, and I didn't know how to ask for help because I'd spent so long being the one everyone else relied on." He paused, meeting her eyes. "You showed me it was okay to not be perfect. You showed me that accepting help doesn't make you weak. It makes you human. You've become one of my closest friends, and Emma adores you. He took a breath. "I haven't felt this way since my wife died. I didn't think I would again. But I'm falling in love with you, Margaret. And I needed you to know." Margaret felt her heart race. She'd felt it too, this growing connection, this sense of coming home that she experienced when she was with David and Emma. But she'd hesitated to name it, afraid of moving too fast, afraid of disrupting the delicate balance they'd found. "I'm falling in love with you too," she said quietly. "With both of you, really. Emma has become incredibly special to me." David reached across the table and took her hand. "No rush," he said. "We can take this as slowly as you need. I just wanted you to know where my heart is." "Where's your heart, Daddy?" came a small voice, and they both turned to see Emma in her wheelchair, being pushed by the restaurant manager who looked apologetic. "I'm so sorry," the manager said. "She was with the babysitter in the lobby waiting area, but she insisted—" "It's fine," David said, laughing despite himself. "Emma, what are you doing here?" "You're Sue."